Yeah, I actually do want to stir up that pot. No, more the thing with the code thing. I actually look at coders in the same way that I suppose graphic designers might look at printers, and how a printer would help prepare the
Well,
work in like the tools. I know the classical designers would have been putting things on lead plates and stuff like that, and building up this, like the whole process would have been the designer. But at some point, just for scale, that became a role, and the designer their tools and process became different. But I don't actually see like much difference. I remember when this was when we first met. Okay, going back to 2014. It may have been Monotype gave a talk at the conference Future of Web Design, where they explained at smaller sizes letters were slightly curved on a lead plate, because if they didn't it would bleed. And this is like a very technical thing, but I think, oh wow, like that's like the coding equivalent of blur. So I mean, what do you think
yeah.
about, I've said lots of things there, Jason, you can unpick that.
Um, well, I there's so much to go into there, and it actually ties in so much with variable fonts. But I don't think I really answered all of Ryan's question. So before we, because that's endless. You just opened the door to like another 4 days of this podcast. So I hope
Yeah.
everybody's like ready for that.
Well, I
But
didn't, Jason, we didn't tell you, but we're actually going to try to break the record for the longest podcast stream. So we have the next 3.5 days are going to be wild.
all right, all
But
right.
yeah, thank you for circling back. Yeah, just the process of like getting there. Like, I think that's super
Yeah.
cool. I think that's I don't know anybody other than you that's in that body. So I'd love to hear how you got there and like what the process looks like.
Yeah. The process was envy and jealousy and shameless self-promotion. But we could probably be a little less flippant about that. I think I want to start in 2010, because that is when I got a beta invite to Typekit. It still, or I guess maybe that was 2009. I got a beta invite to Typekit, and I started using web fonts. So reference back to Mandy's episode when she talked about Cipher and Qfont. I suffered with that for a couple of years, and then Typekit launched, and that was the first time that you could embed real fonts easily on a web page. And what I immediately noticed were some of the things that people complained about, and one of those things was FOUT, or flash of unstyled text, and that was the condition, and we still see it today, where text shows up on the screen in Times New Roman or Helvetica or Arial or whatever, and then it like flips into the web font and the page redraws, and very often your navigation reflows, your headlines reflow, things jump around, and anybody that's thinking long and hard about core web vitals right now, which is like everyone on the web, that's a big problem. So, talk about like repainting a massive amount of the screen because your text metrics are all different. And that was a real problem, and a lot of people were refusing to use web fonts because that problem existed. And I started noodling around with some ideas. Google was working at the time, I think, collaborating with Bram Stein, who's currently at Adobe, creating the web font loader, and that was the precursor to what Bram has done recently called Font Face Observer. And that was a way to add some classes into the page during the loading process so that you could do something about it. You'd know whether or not the fonts were there. And um, and that kind of gave me an idea where, well, then the problem with FOUT is the U, it's the unstyled part. So
Yeah.
if you style the fallback fonts during the loading process, then nobody notices. It's like a JPEG coming in and sharpening up, or like a GIF, coming in pixelated and then fully loading and looking sharper. So it's the same kind of idea. And I had started working on a module for Drupal to integrate Typekit, and at 2000, where I gave my first talk actually. Ever at a conference was at Future of Web Design in New York in 2010 in the fall, and I met someone from Monotype there. They were just launching their web font service, and I just walked up and I said, "Hey, you guys doing anything in open source stuff? I'm doing this stuff with Typekit and Drupal, and I'd love to help if there's anything I can do." And that was my introduction to Monotype. And flash forward like a month or two, they're headquartered in Boston, which is about an hour away from me. and they just invited me to come up to their office and said, well, this is really cool. We do want to collaborate with you on this because we do have open source stuff that we want to get into. But would you be interested in writing for our blog? And so that was the first thing I wrote about, was how to deal with Fout. How could you like tune up those fallback fonts so that you don't really notice that shift, and your layout doesn't reflow and your navigation stays in one place. And that's actually still something that not a lot of people think about, but it is absolutely a valid thing today. It's more and more important than ever with the shift in Core Web Vitals and the meaning of that. Reducing the layout shift, that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Um, and so my point with that was I was just interested. I was curious. And so I started working at something, and it's kind of similar to what Mandy said. It was a sanity thing. I wanted to play with something, and it led me to figure something out, and then realizing that nobody was really talking about how you could solve this problem. They were just lamenting the fact that it existed, and so that was kind of my way in the door there, and from that point forward, that's pretty much all I've spoken about at conferences is web typography, and how, not just what its meaning is and its importance aesthetically, but also technically, how can it improve the user experience? How can we implement it well so that it doesn't degrade the performance, it doesn't impede getting content rendered on the page, and so it's meant that. Sorry, I'm just opening the screen door so Tristan can go outside.
No, that's fine. Our kids will probably running at some point screaming.
Yeah. We keep it professional and classy here. We've got dogs wandering in and out. So it was showing up. It was being interested, and that is what has always opened the door for me in successive iterations of this stuff. It led to writing a book for O'Reilly about web typography, which came out right around the time that Mustafa and I met in London. It has gotten me invited to events all over the world, and that one in particular in Berlin at Typo Labs, there were a bunch of people from different browser teams that were there, and a lot of people from the W3C, and that's when I started hearing about stuff like, well, you could come to this meeting, and so I got to see things going on there, and then I realized that you could apply to be an invited expert, and I think I had done it once a while ago and never heard anything, but I did it again, and I just went to the people that I knew who were on that working group and said, hey, I applied for this, I really want to do it, and so it was showing up and being interested and engaged, and so that it was a remarkable realization for me that if you want to be engaged in the process of defining and moving the web forward, you just have to show up, and yes, there's more to it than that, but the discussion forums are open. And then when you start to participate more, then you start to learn a little bit more about how to participate. And when you want to, voice an opinion about something, you learn a little bit about how to support that opinion and say, well, I think this is really important. Here's the history, and rehere's the use case, and here's how I think it should behave. And it's a long process because they have a lot of work to do on a lot of different fronts, but that was really eye-opening for me, that if you want to be a part of how the web works, you can actually just stand up and say, hey, I would like to participate, and you can find a way in to do that.